torn country, it's a divided country. It can go one way, it can go the other way. You know, it can go Islamist, it can drift. And this debate about the drift and about the Islamization of Turkey really picked up just a few years later. Not with the victory of AKP, which was very well received here in the US, but then with the Iraq war and the Turkey decision not to be part of that and not to allow American troops to use the logistics. And that led again to a very polarized debate here in the US, but mainly negative for at least a few years, which impacted on European views, because Europeans, again, found themselves in a very interesting situation at the time. I mean, on the one hand, several European countries were against the Iraq war, and so they were aligned with what Turkey did, right? They had a lot of reservations about invading Iraq and about US unilateralism. But on the other hand, they couldn't really figure out what Turkey was doing, and their American allies were saying, well, you know, we know what they're doing. They're saying no to a big strategic decision that we have made. This proves that this government is not fully reliable. They may have a hidden agenda. There were people saying that. So again, for Europe, on the one hand, there was a tension, you know, and the role that Turkey could play in important areas of the Middle East peace process, you know, mediation, regional mediation. But on the issue of membership, a lot of countries said, you know, why should we proceed with accession with a country that may be drifting after all, or may have an hidden agenda after all? So I think these positions in the US overall had a negative impact on the accession process. And while they were saying Turkey is drifting, or may have an hidden agenda, or may become Islamist, they were also saying, well, but the EU should include Turkey. I mean, the EU has made a commitment. It's a shame that the EU is backtracking on that commitment. And it leads us to more recent years where, again, you know, just a couple of years ago, you had the Obama administration criticizing Turkey in a very direct way for what it did with Brazil on the Iranian nuclear issue, and with also the tensions with Israel and other things, but at the same time saying, well, you know, the EU has to make a decision, has to follow up with the accession process. So very mixed messages. I mean, if Turkey is a big question mark, why do you want to bring a big question mark into your community? If Turkey is, you know, a country that may drift, why do you want to bring it into a union which, in the meantime, as we all know, started facing more and more internal problems? And that's where I get to where we stand right now. I think that we stand in a very volatile situation, but you know, that is very suboptimal for the three of us. I mean, and we were having these discussions this morning at another conference on, you know, both for the EU, Turkey, and the US. On the one hand, you have a Turkey that, you know, has managed to cope with the change in the region in ways that a lot of us could not expect. When it started, Turkey had made, you know, it deepened its relations with some of the regimes that are no longer there, and prided itself of being able to build these relationships, and was quick enough to shift in many ways. I mean, and to stand with the forces of change. At the same time, it is discovering very fast that, you know, a Turkey-centered approach to the region has a lot of problems, because it's a region that doesn't have coherence. The Arab Spring has made it even more fragmented with different trajectories. There are political issues, but there are also security challenges. And, you know, you may call it, you may not want to call it neo-Ottoman, but, you know, the view that the government has developed in the past few years is really based on this notion that Turkey is at the center of the region, is at the center of these intersecting geostrategic areas, the Middle East, the Balkans, you know, the East as well. And I think, you know, that has to be reviewed and probably revised and corrected a little bit. And there's enormous potential for Turkey as a regional player and even as a regional leader. But a view that is Turkey-centric, you know, I don't think we go too far, and you know, we may discuss why. while this is happening, and Turkey is surrounded by a lot of crises, particularly Syria, but others, you have Turkish-U.S. relations that suddenly have improved. 2 years ago, not just the commentators, but a lot of people in the administration were very pessimistic. Now it's a sort of love affair. I mean, if you go around town and you listen to the administration, I mean, they turn to Turkey almost to I would say subcontract pieces of U.S. foreign policy, or at least they don't see any other player that can fill into the very difficult situation that the Middle East poses when it comes to Syria or other countries. But is this structural? Is this something sustainable? Is this really based on a better understanding of Turkey than a few years ago? I'm not sure about that. You still have a lot of skepticism in Congress. You still have some of the same intellectuals and scholars who are very much skeptical about what Turkey can do or can achieve, what its real agenda really is. And it's very much for now a convergence of interest that is too recent and probably too superficial for now to give the necessary perspective. And it's very much limited for now to the administration, and the administration may be reconfirmed or may change. And future crises, we were discussing this. I mean, a future crisis involving Iran, for instance, may again lead to very polarized views and a lot of tensions. In the meantime, the EU has almost completely disappeared from the picture, at least if you are in Washington. The attention is, of course, on the crisis of the Eurozone. Public opinion doesn't have time to follow foreign policy, and they want to know what is going to happen to their saving accounts in euro. And they read about Turkey, they read about Erdogan and the ambition, and they all got the point that Turkey is a new Turkey and is a more assertive actor. It has an economy that is working, but nobody is buying into the notion that Turkey can save the EU. I mean, Europeans know well enough that they have to solve their own problems. It's never going to be so easy, just to bring Turkey in, and the EU is going to resurrect as an economic powerhouse. I mean, you need, bitter medicine, a lot of internal reforms, and which have an impact on the accession process. I mean, enlargement fatigue, is even more accentuated now than a few years ago. We're going to be able to enlarge to Croatia, but the Balkans already pose a huge challenge, and Turkey is really down the road. Even if the French position was to change, and the people say, well, don't expect too much even from the new president. But even if that was to change, I mean, the prospect isn't really there. So what the EU is talking more and more is about the Turkish model for the Arab world, even though the Turks themselves don't talk about the model. They say, well, it can be an inspiration. But Europeans talk about it, and but again, the vetoes of the accession process have impacted that. So even this more limited strategic dialogue about the neighborhood is not taking off. Partly because the EU is really focused on its internal problems, and partly because when they've tried, the European Commission has tried to promote that, then you still have the usual vetoes. You have the Republic of Cyprus not really being happy about developing all this. You even have countries like France that are, in general terms, they are in favor of that. I mean, but take Libya, a complete example. There were issues at the beginning. What if we involve Turkey and then Turkey pulls back? At the time, Turkey wasn't too willing about regime change in Libya when France stood up, and they were afraid of moving the issue to NATO because they said, well, then Turkey has a say, and Turkey may veto things, and So again, when you move from the general idea to the practical cooperation, you get into a much more mixed situation. A final point on what I think is missing, again, not just a serious trilateral discussion about what to do together. So the U.S. focused very much on Turkey and on its own strategic priorities, leaving the EU, sidelining the EU, looking at Turkey as a model but not really pursuing this. Turkey, very much confident about what it can do, and probably not facing enough the reality of even some failures in its foreign policy and the limits of its power. But the accession process is not debated anymore, even though important things are happening. I mean, there are plans to revise the constitution. Things are moving in Turkey, and I would argue that Europeans should appreciate much more the role that transformations in Turkey have in shaping Turkish foreign policy. I mean, much of what we are seeing is Erdogan and its charismatic leadership, but a lot of it is about the growing role of Turkish public opinion in shaping foreign policy decisions, something that is until a few years ago was simply not true. I mean, this constant role, which may lead to populism, right? It may lead to following public opinion instead of informing it. But there are domestic pressures. When Erdogan talks about Israel, I mean, he knows that people in Turkey listen, but also other factors. I mean, the economy, which was a big driver of the economic growth, which was a big driver of Turkey's expansion in the neighborhood. And also the fact that Turkey has changed politically, and I think overall has become more democratic. But to finish really my intervention, in the context of this trilateral discussion, Turkey, the US, and the EU, on what to do with this huge area, which is the post-Ottoman space, which is largely unstable, and now we can unfortunately include Greece in the picture. I mean, we thought we had figured out that one, but we are left with a lot of instability in southeastern Europe and the rest of the areas that Middle East and North Africa. Something that we should all, in that context, I think, agree on is that the Turkish experience, I would call it, not model, is something in the making, and the attraction and the power of that model depend on what Turkey can achieve domestically. Which means, making sure that economic development, economic growth continues. That's one piece. But also making sure that Turkey continues its process of democratic consolidation, because this is something that other people in the region will look at. If Turkey never fully democratizes, they're gonna get the point that you can still have a relatively successful economic model without full democratization, with limits in human rights and other issues. I think for Western leaders, but also for Turks who really have an interest in regional development and in Turkey's future, this link between what Turkey still has to achieve and can still accomplish, I would put it in a positive way, the achievements that it can still make, and the power that it's going to have as a result in the region, this link has to be emphasized much further. Otherwise, the discussion becomes about Turkey's ambition in the region, the leadership ambition, and the strategic dialogue with the US on issues such as Iran and Israel's security, but at the expense of this much larger and much more important debate on what makes stability. Is it full democratization or not? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emiliano. And before I open the discussion to the floor, an American strategic thinker, Brzezinski, in his recent book, he calls Europe the most comfortable retirement home of the world. And he says the continent that are filled with the people who are more concerned with their social security than their physical and national security. And he goes on and establishes views on the entire of these two things. Now, the last 10 years story between Turkey and European Union, and this is on the accession part, is in 2000 where Turkey was and where the European Union was. And in 10 years later where Turkey is both economically, democratically, and as a country, and stability, and what has done in the meantime, and what happened to European Union as an entity. In 2000, where it was in terms of economics and in terms of the strength of euro financial system and where it is right now. One of my first questions, for Turks, what is the attraction that the European Union can offer? Why the domestic politicians who are answerable to people as good as or as well as any other European politician, why should they spend political capital in the accession, where most of the time European politicians use the Turkish accession as for their domestic purposes, and whether nobody can really accurately predict whether there will be a European Union 2 years down the road. Now, when Emiliano was talking on the Greece, now Greece is already digested, but what would happen to Italy and Spain that everybody is afraid at this point? So the thing is, when the whole thing is in shambles, what is still the worth to invest from the Turkish perspective? And I will ask you this one. And one more thing. Not too long ago, less than probably a year and a half, I was talking to a French senator who was a close friend of mine, and we had to serve in the same organization for a few years, both actively serving in their relative parliaments. And I asked him what was this deep trouble that their president or the culture had this or it was more visible towards Turkey. And then he told me something, and I could justify that. And he said that at some point in Lebanon, from 1970s until 2000s, where there was a crisis to be solved politically, usually the French foreign minister told them what to do, and then the things were done that way. But if you look at the last 10 years, you will see the Lebanese organizations or Lebanese political powers, they will be looking towards the Turkish foreign minister rather than the French foreign minister. So if you were a French, he said, how would you feel about this? And that is practically how he could justify. So essentially what you are testing on the intellectuals and the elites and the policy people, policymakers of the Europe. I mean, aren't they right? I mean, there is a power shift in terms of influence to the region. And beyond, if you can take this independent of the Turkish-European relations, wouldn't these feelings are very normal feelings? So let us start with these, and then we can get some questions from others, please.
Well, let me respond to the first question, because second is very abstract. I'm not sure whether I can respond to the second one. As far as investment in the, let's say, project of the European Union by the Turkish leaders, and really whether Turkish people would like to see such kind of investment, I think the European Union is not only a political union for Turks. Europe as a whole is an idea, it is kind of an ideal for Turks. The European Union is just a structure, yes, it is quite an important part of it, but the Europeanization of Turkey started much earlier than Turkey's European accession process. And I think this is one case. Therefore, for Turks, Europe will remain as an important ideal for years to come. That is one thing. The second thing is that although this government or the previous governments in the last 15 to 20 years have improved the democracy, economy, etc., etc., but when you look down the road, you will see that in 2002, 2003, when this government came to power, there were some military people who were involved in overthrowing the government. Now we see that this whole Ergenekon investigation is taking place. And in 2007, again, there was this military, not an intervention as you would remember, that there was an internet statement by the military. Still, I think in the Turkish case, this I will, I think, follow from what Emiliano said. The whole idea of democratization in Turkey and the rule of law and respecting citizens rather than the interest of the state. I think this is not going to go on its own in Turkey, even though the politicians, current politicians, both the government and the opposition, even if they want to see such kind of direction, because of the, I think, structural problems in Turkey since the 1960s, even though the government come to power, but the military, judiciary, and the other, let's say, civil powers in Turkey were obstacles before the democratization processes in many ways. Therefore, I think Europe, though there are some crises, there is a special financial crisis in Turkey. I think Turks are not looking at Europe through the lenses of economics only. Turks are looking at Europe through the lenses of standards of life, democratization, human rights, rule of law. These sort of things, I think, will remain on the agenda of the Turkish public, even though maybe the government will not, or the governments will not invest that much. But I think this interest in the European Union will continue in Turkey, because it was through the European Union membership negotiations or this harmonizations of the laws that Turkish democracy has become what it has become now. It wouldn't have been that easy for Turks to, for example, minimize the role of the army and also the ideology of the state would have remained for a long time to come. Therefore, I think the attraction of the European Union will remain in Turkey for some time to come. For your second question, it is right. I mean, after the Cold War, the whole world is changing, and the power shift is changing as well. And the new actors are emerging, like the BRICS. Therefore, what I see from the European perspective, and the US perspective might be different, I think they have a rational perception of Turkish foreign policy. And not only Turkey as well, when they look at the Arab world, when they look at what's going on in North Africa, I think they, in the beginning they had also a little bit of reluctance, but they have seen that the power of the people are there and is there, and they follow suit.
Yeah, just a few points. I think from what I understand, the interest in joining the European Union has declined in Turkey before the European crisis. At the time, I'm speaking of a few years ago, it was mainly as a result of disenchantment and resentment with the vetoes coming from Paris and other European capitals. So it was, a position based on pride in many ways. Then, with the European crisis on the one hand and successful overall economic story in Turkey, a lot of people have come to the conclusion that maybe they don't even need to join a community of nations that has so many problems, that has not so much to offer. And so they want to remain European, as you said. I mean, the European idea remains, but the interest in the European Union as such is much less. And the problem is that Europeans themselves, on the one hand, have seen this Turkey rising, but public opinion is becoming more nationalistic in all countries and more xenophobic in all countries as a result of the crisis. So on the one hand, the debate after 9/11 on the clash of civilization, all that is somewhat faded. And very few people, very few commentators, very few opinion shapers will now write articles about Turkey going east. At the same time, there's no appetite among Europeans for not just for enlargement, for just having new people from other nations in their societies. But paradoxically, we might be at a point where some of the long-time requests of Turkey and the Turkish people, such as visa liberalization, some of these things may actually happen. Not because Europe all of a sudden is far-sighted and forward-looking and open-minded about all these things, but because of, again, the instability in the region, the need for a readmission agreement really in place to make sure that the many illegal immigrants that cross the border between Turkey and the EU, if they are sent back, they really go back and Turkey really takes care of them. And the latest things I heard when I was in Brussels was that there was some possibility of a breakthrough on that, or a sort of agreement on having visa liberalization for Turkey in exchange for a tougher Turkish stance on illegal immigration. And that could, together maybe with a more open-minded view on the part of the current French president, who's giving a speech right now, I think, here in town. So let's hear what he has to say. But could create a new dynamic. But again, I mean, a new dynamic meaning in a more cooperative atmosphere, not necessarily something sustainable and not necessarily something leading to a real change. From the point of view of those who follow the issue of Turkey, I would say, well, Turkey is still very much part of the European economies. It has a customs union with the EU, which makes sense. Maybe not, not only, but it makes sense to the extent that Turkey has in the future a prospect of joining the EU. Otherwise, decisions on trade policy will be made without Turkey on the table, and this has been a complaint over and over again from Ankara, not being able to have a say in a policy that affects them directly. And capital still comes very much from Europe. So there's a double interest, like in remaining integrated with Europe, but remaining integrated with the Europe that is in good economic shape, because almost 70%, I think, of capital inflows, which are still very much critical in Turkey for Turkey's own domestic growth, comes from European countries. And a lot of the leverage that Turkey will have as a regional power, if you leave aside the issue of who is going to have an impact on the Arab world, is really being a corridor for energy. And again, the ones who are going to buy energy are the Europeans. So again, that's right there another deep interconnection between Turkey and the EU from a more geoeconomic point of view.
Thank you very much. I just want to make one statement. I don't want to be misunderstood. I was in Turkey last week, and I have listened at a 45-minute speech by the chief negotiator and the Minister of European Affairs, Egemen Boş. He has been, and he was, in the last speech he made, more enthusiastic than I have ever seen him in the last 10 years on the accession to the European Union. So I don't want to give a wrong impression. Please.
I just want to build on what you just stated. With the Sarkozy's gone now, and we have heard from Stefan Füle, Enlargement Commissioner, just stated that there could be a positive agenda, and the other, few other developments. So, going forward, my question is: should we expect the same kind of good relations that we had in the past, not the last couple of years, few years? Should we have also positive agenda going forward? That, some chapters maybe opening. Anything fundamental is happening.
Well, the positive agenda, as you know, was proposed last year, and it made very limited progress beyond the good intentions. And for those of you who don't know about the positive agenda, this was an attempt, led by the European Commission to propose something, a bit outside the accession process, in the areas in which progress could be made, going around the vetoes of individual countries, with several components, one of which was foreign policy and cooperation in the neighborhood. And the interest was there, but again, the vetoes, it was never completely able, this initiative, to work around existing vetoes. So it didn't really take off. But it's not a new initiative. What may make it more interesting now is, maybe a different French position. So we still don't know, of course, what the new French president will do vis-a-vis Turkey. He's on the record, not as president, but as a political leader, for having said that he doesn't have a defensive attitude in the same way Sarkozy had. He was very negative on the issue of accession, and was also kind of negative on the idea that it's okay if Turkey cooperates, but because of changing power balances, giving too much of a role of for Turkey in the Middle East may mean less for France. And there are legacies and that are difficult to overcome. And in some of these countries, French influence is still very, very important. So, from what I know, from the people very close to Hollande, I mean, unfortunately, there's not too much to be expected. So something that could be a breakthrough in the short term would be the lifting of the veto on those chapters of negotiation that France keeps frozen, as vetoed unilaterally. These are important chapters. If this happens, but it remains to be seen, it means that negotiations could proceed probably on a few of these issues. But again, this would generate some positive momentum. But what would be the long-term consequence of this? We should be, I think, still at this stage very modest and very cautious, because other vetoes would remain. The Republic of Cyprus is no secret as in a very strong position. They have elections next year. They're probably not going to change until then, and probably not even afterwards. They have become closer and closer with Israel, and between Turkey and Israel there is right now no real dialogue. So it's not an easy situation. And then you have Germany, was never openly against, but it was not even in favor of accession, and they have. I'm not sure they're going to be convinced by a different French position. And then you have the Austrians, who are also very skeptical, and so yeah, it could be a sort of short-term improvement, but then there will still be a big question mark of whether this is the beginning of a new dynamic or not.
Well, I think in Turkey there is some kind of expectation, of course, that the new president in France will have a different stand. But of course, it is too early to say. Despite the fact that even Europe does not change its attitude, what I read from the Turkish officials is that they will continue to reform, to change the laws, regulations, etc., etc. They will be prepared to open the chapters when some of the European countries lift their vetoes. In Turkey, there is that preparation, that institutional changes are still going on. That is an indication that Turkey's interest remains alive in the European Union project.
Please.
I'm Michael Kurtzy. I used to work in the Turkish desk in the Department of Agriculture for many years. Now retired. Talip, I don't know if I misunderstood some of the comments that you made concerning the pressure of Islam in Europe. You hear about the demographics information, and you hear the European populations in Europe are declining, but the Muslim populations are increasing quite rapidly. You see in Paris on Friday, the streets are blocked and people praying over there, supposedly is against the law. You hear in Belgium that half the children are in Muhammad. How much of that figures into Turkey's possibility of getting into the EU? That seems to be a fundamental problem in this dialogue.
Right, of course there are those, as I said, who use this culturalist approach to Turkey's accession process, saying that Turkey belongs to a different civilizational zone, and therefore some people disagree with Turkey's membership. But when you look at Europe as an idea, where pluralism, diversity, democracy, human rights, these sort of things are really at the basis of the European identity or European foundation, I think Islam should not be an obstacle to become a member of the European Union. Rather, it will, if Turkey becomes a member of the European Union, Turkey will add a new value or new dimension to the European identity. So far, European identity is seen as an identity that is inspired by the Greek and Byzantine civilizational values, etc., etc. But especially after the failure of the European economies in several countries, and especially the damage to the welfare state, social welfare state, we see this rise of xenophobia, racism, etc., etc. And time to time, this demographic issue is also mentioned, that Europe will become Euro-Arabia. Yes, right. And currently what we know is that in Europe, the population, Muslim population, as immigrant origin, is around 17 million in different countries. When you add Balkans to this number, it's about 23 million in Europe. And if Turkey becomes member of the European Union, add almost 100 million. For some, of course, for those who look at the future of Europe through these cultural lenses, it is a threat to the European identity or European civilization. But if you look at Europe as not a this kind of ideological unit, but as a political and economic unit, which will embrace all kinds of differences within it, ideally, then it is not a threat. But this is a current issue in many European cities and countries that rising Islamophobia is a cause of concern, and the rise of far-right parties as well.
Please.
Domani. Okay. Daniele Moro, John South I share the view of Emiliano, maybe because we are both Italians. So I don't need to repeat what he said about our position vis-à-vis Turkey, because we are in friendly relations since a century, probably. Few probably. I mean, what I found very interesting is that Emiliano has stressed what's happening at your country in this city. In the past 2 years, I must confirm that there has been a big change. And this is about the shield, the NATO shield. I would say 99% the pro-Turkey attitude in this city has changed when it was clear that Poland alternative or whatever was not good. And again, I think Emiliano has been very honest to tell you that you have to solve few problems. First, I think it's a wrong approach to say to the EU, we are becoming more and more democratic, and then you have to allow us. You become more and more democratic because your country has to develop in a better way, not because you have to come inside the EU.